Hey guys, today we'll talk about how to play Black Templars competitively. We'll look at their weaknesses, strength, army composition, how to build their list, synergies, and so on and so forth. So without further ado, let's dive right in. As we always do, we start with the strength. They are Space Marines, so they get access to the almighty Oath of Moment and the internal synergy of units in the Space Marine Index, which there are quite a lot of. Like the Chaplain giving +1 to wound to the squad in melee, or the Company Champion giving +1 to advances and charges to his squad, and so on and so forth. A plethora of choices which can support almost any playstyle, including the one that Black Templars like, which is a relatively fast melee wall, moving gradually forward, backed up by good guns and multiple synergies from characters and stratagems. So Oath provides us with a way to reliably kill a thing in a battle round, provided we have the volume of attacks, some AP and damage on our hands already. Basic Marines get, in addition to that, their doctrines, which give them some flexibility, like falling back and charging and shooting, shooting and advancing, and charging after advancing. Instead of that, the Black Templars get their Templar vows, which are a game-long buff for the entire army. This is quite different compared to the Space Marines, where they get a choice of 3, but they can only use each for a single battle round in a game. So 2 battle rounds out of 5, you're gonna have no buffs from that ability whatsoever. Problem with the Templars thing is that you have to choose 1 out of 4, which means that you will always be sacrificing something. The choices themselves are very good though. The lethal hits or sustained hits 1 in melee for the entire army, 4+ invulnerable save against psychic attacks, and anti-psyker 4+ in melee for your own attacks, and 6+ feel no pain and 5+ leadership for your army. So these 4 choices you have to choose from in the beginning of the game. All are great, but I'd say that probably in most cases you will be selecting from one of the first 2, because the anti-psyker one is only ever necessary when you're fighting Grey Knights of Thousand Suns, and the survivability one is, even though great, and don't get me wrong, survivability is awesome, but for what you are melee faction, you want some extra punch in combat, and that's what the first 2 fighty one provide. And thanks to these vows and unique units and several stratagems, which we're going to talk about later, the Black Templars are one of the most powerful melee chapters, second to maybe Blood Angels. Now, every army has a weakness, and obviously Black Templars are not an exception. Their first problem is that they are not incredibly fast. For an army with a melee-focused output, they have only a few ways of getting their speed up from the basic Space Marine level, which, as we know, is not awesome, especially now when they got rid of all the nice combos with like Chaplain giving us +2 to the charge rolls and +3 to pylons and consolidations, what we used to have in 9th edition. All that stuff is more or less gone. You have only one way to advance and charge, you have no unique bonuses to advance and charge rolls, and you have about 1 mobility stratagem, which is the Develop Push one. Not bad by any stretch of imagination, but now it's, even though it's D6 instead of 3 inches that we used to have before, but now it's only activated when your opponent kills a model in your squad, which means that your opponent can essentially control when you have an option to use one. If they shoot only at 1 model, units like dreadnoughts, tanks, and so on and so forth, or maybe engage the smaller stuff which you don't care about, you will not get to use that stratagem on something that you actually wanted to. And they also get no fight first buffs whatsoever. For a melee faction, that's quite a big problem. Obviously, fight first and fight last abilities are much less prevalent now than they were in 9th, so I'm not gonna judge Black Templars for not having that. Almost no one has any fight first stuff on their actually decent fighting units. It's a rarity, so it's okay for them not to have it, considering everything else they have. Their vows are a tough choice because you select one for the entire game, and even though there are some obvious choices for cases like playing against Grey Knights, Thousand Suns, you select the anti-psyker one, or when you're playing against Knights, you get to almost automatically choose the lethal hits one. in almost all other cases, you will have to think between the sustained hits and lethal hits. The rule of thumb here is that if most units that you're going to be engaging in the game, and you can determine that by just looking at the roster of your opponent, if most of them will be wounded by your stuff on 5s and 6s, then lethal hits are the best choice. If instead you're up against a more horde army where you're mostly going to be winning on 2s and 3s, then sustained hits is the best pick. For a 4+, it's kind of whatever you want to choose. Plus, all enhancements get an added bonus with each vow, so that's another layer of complexity, because it means that if you take an enhancement and you pay points for it, you will then have this additional argument to choose a vow over another one, because then you're going to get an extra bonus to your enhancement, but then the entire buff can be not the optimal one. So that's the issue with the enhancements that Black Templars have. Survivability also changed compared to 9th edition, because now you still have a couple of ways of getting that 5-up, 6-up shrug, which they have either the uphold the honor of the emperor vow, or the 5-up shrugs from Grimaldus, and also one of the enhancements. However, they don't get the transhuman, baby transhuman anymore, and they don't get the 5-up invulnerable save anymore. So Black Templars are no longer in this weird state where they are both a very good fighty chapter and also for some reason one of the most survivable Space Marine chapters out of all of them, which is probably a justified choice. However, as Black Templars, we would like to have all the nice things. So to get survivability, you will have to struggle a little bit on the roster building part of your game, where you actually implement those character buffs into your bigger squads and think about how you're going to be protecting them. Because yes, you have Armor of Contempt stratagem like all these Space Marine chapters, but that's only one unit you're going to protect, and that protection is not absolute. Their melee is great, but without the fighty vows, your main melee squads might struggle against high toughness targets, even with Oath of Moment. Because even if you have full rerolls to wounding on 6s, it's still worse statistically than wounding on 5s, and 5s was never reliable. You should build each of your lists considering that you are going to be encountering toughness 10, toughness 12 targets, sometimes with -1 damage, and what are you gonna do about that? So how are we gonna tackle army composition? Let's start with the easy things. We're always gonna be trying to build a balanced roster as usual, so the first thing that I always look at is what's gonna be holding my home objective. Almost no army, no faction in the game is immune to that nuisance, keeping something cheap on your home objective to score your primaries, sometimes secondaries as well. So that is going to be a necessity in each of your lists. Here we are more or less down to the same choices as regular Space Marines, so Intercessors are a good choice for 95 points. You get a Sticky Objectives rule, which is mostly important not even to run around with your Intercessors capturing multiple objectives, but to make sure that if something happens to their OC, like sudden battle shock or something like that, you're not going to lose that objective. It's going to be still yours until your opponent claims it. Or the Whirlwind for some indirect fire and harassment of the home objective units of your opponent. That Whirlwind may not be super deadly in the first turn, but if it keeps firing at that squad in the back corner of the battlefield of your opponent, turn after turn after turn, then it's going to eventually kill the thing that holds the home objective, and it's going to be a problem diverting resources from something that your opponent actually wants to dedicate the resources to. If you don't want to spend so many points, you can instead choose to go for the Crusaders, which are 75 points only for the 5-man squad and are relatively nice for their price. Another interesting choice are Scout Snipers. I really like them because they're untouchable from far away. They can only be shot if the unit that's shooting them is within 12 of them, and they have sniper rifles which can threaten enemy characters. So that's quite a unique you cannot touch me, but I can touch you kind of a situation. Next, another more or less mandatory part is firepower. I never build a melee focused list without some anti-tank, because remember, you're still going to cross that 24-inch distance between you and your opponent. That always will have to happen, in most deployments at least, and your opponent doesn't want you to charge them. So you need something to reach out and touch their important stuff, at least to keep the pressure on. So the tanks are good now. Finally, you can take predators with less cannons, you can take gladiators, whatever you want, however many points you have, whatever you have in your collection. Almost all of them are in some way, shape or form good and decent as anti-tank support threats. You can also take Desolation Marines, even though they got hit by a nerf in terms of points, they're still decent and can deal with some heavy stuff with rerolls from Oath. I personally would probably gravitate towards Redemptors just because, first of all, I love Redemptors and I really like their versatility and resilience. They can shoot very well comparatively, they can fight very well, which tanks and Desolation squads cannot do, and they also are very resilient. They're more resilient than the tanks because of that sweet -1 damage which they kept. So add 3 of the Redemptors, and also I would suggest a unit of 6 Eradicators in reserve for some surgical application of firepower. With their crazy full rerolls to hit, wound and damage rule, they are a perfect choice to destroy some nasty, annoying monster vehicle target that your opponent has and that your Redemptors did not manage to fully finish off. Plus, you don't have to fire at your Oath of Moment target, which gives you more flexibility. Next, we have our melee heavy hitters. I really like the 20-man Primaris Crusader squad because of the volume of attacks you get, and that couples very well with your fighty vows, especially the lethal hits one, and also the leader buffs and the stratagems. There's just something beautiful about the 20-man Primaris blob running forward with help of characters and trying to get to the opponent and carve up some whatever heretics. In addition to them, you can go for the Assault Terminators or a bit cheaper but less durable Sword Brethren. Both hit like an absolute train. The Assault Terminators, thanks to their devastating wounds rule on the hammers, which coupled with full rerolls to hit and wound from Oath of Moment is just crazy, because you're going to do 3 mortal wounds on each roll of a 6, and the squad of 10 has 30 attacks. So if you do the math, that's a lot of mortal wounds. Sword Brethren are also good. They are a bit more expensive than they were when the index just dropped out. They were hit by a nerf hammer, probably justified, because they get that sweet +1 damage rule, which you can select. And they also fit well into the Impulsor, so if you want some beta strike potential, they are a good choice for that. I also really like the Inceptors because of their ability to deep strike within 3 inches of the opponent. That gives you a chance to threaten your opponent's hidden units whilst your main line advances forward, and that can be extremely disruptive, especially if you kill like a small squad on that back objective, and then your opponent has to come back, deal with your 9 wounds of toughness 6 in power armor, and get that objective back. For your big infantry blobs, you have quite a collection of character support choices, and Grimaldus and Helbrecht are still great. Helbrecht is probably a bit less than he was in previous edition. Grimaldus is still just badass. Lastly, as a melee army, you crave ways to control movement of your opponent, because you are going forward and you don't want to encounter too many opposing units when you do reach the enemy lines. So being able to make some of your opponent's units slower is great, and Thunderfire Cannon for 90 points is also a good choice for your home objective. Now the special characters. First, Helbrecht, again, as I said, he is a bit nerfed compared to previous edition, but still not bad. He's a good buffing character. Lost a ton of durability. He was 8 wounds back in 9th, now it's 5. He gives +1 strength to the squad that he leads, and he can lead both flavors of intercessors, the assault ones and the regular intercessors. He can lead Primaris Crusaders and also the Sword Brethren. His second ability is probably even more important, which means that every 5+ to hit will count as a critical hit, and this will work for the purposes of your fighty vows. So if he leads a big blob of Sword Brethren, for example, then every 5 or 6 to hit is going to be automatically wounding or exploding, depending on what you chose. And he also has an ability to do mortal wounds in the fight phase to enemy units that you're in engagement with. And on a 2+ it's D3, on 4+ on 4/5 it's 3 mortal wounds, and on a 6 it's d3 plus 3. That's very useful because you can do that before fighting with your squad, and you can finish off something small and something that you wouldn't want to dedicate your attacks to, and then fully focus on the actual threat. He's quite dangerous in combat as well. He has 6 attacks at strength 8, AP 3, damage 3, or 12 attacks at strength 6, AP still 3, and damage 1. I wonder how he manages to keep that sweep AP so high, even though, for example, the Nemesis Dread Knight with a sword that's twice the height of Helbrecht himself goes from AP 2 down to AP 1. He is also leadership 5, so his squad is less susceptible to battle shock, so he is in general quite good for his 105 points. We see this pattern with Custodes, now with Black Templars, that the special characters in most cases are no longer these be-all, do-all choices which you just have to have in your roster. The Trajan Valorous is no longer a mandatory choice. Helbrecht is also not that necessary in each of your lists. Still quite good and useful, but not that you cannot build a list without him. And probably that's good. Chaplain Grimaldus. As was the case in 9th, he's a buffing machine. He gives his squad full rerolls to hit and melee. Great for your fighty vows, because whenever you reroll stuff, you have a chance of getting extra 6s, getting those lethal or sustained hits. And he also has a second ability, which is a choose one of 3 kind of a buff, like the Abaddon or Rabuti Gilman have. So essentially, you in your command phase select one of these, and it is active until your next command phase. Problem here is timing, because you selected in your command phase. So if you go second, it means that you cannot benefit from the defensive ability, which is a shame. So you will have to hide behind the ruined wall. Buffs are 5+ feel no pain for the squad, already awesome, very good for a big blob of whatever. +1 AP for the squad, or advance and fallback and charge for the squad. He also has 5+ feel no pain himself, and he has a better Crozies with 5 attacks at strength 6, AP 2, damage 2. So he is definitely good at 120 points. I like how he's more expensive than Helbrecht, because his buffs are arguably more important. And lastly, Emperor's Champion. He's supposed to be an absolute character killer, and he definitely isn't bad in that regard. His melee is 6 attacks, essentially the same as Helbrecht, so 6 attacks, strength 8, AP 3, damage 3, or 12 attacks at strength 6, AP 2, damage 1, so 1 less AP than the Helbrecht on the sweep. He also gets +1 to wound against characters, and can ignore 1 melee attack, the damage reduced to 0 at turn. My problem with the Emperor's Champion is that he takes up the leader slot, and he doesn't allow any other characters to be leaders in that unit, which is annoying. So he's taking up a squad but doesn't give anything back to the squad. And even though his melee is good, he's still not going to kill every character that he touches, because he doesn't have rerolls to wound, he doesn't have rerolls to hit. So it means that he will be missing on ones, and he's also not going to be wounding sometimes. Would definitely rather have reroll to wound against characters, which champions usually have, instead of the +1 to wound here. But still, he's definitely not bad by any stretch of imagination, and his price point is okay at 85 points. The Synergies. If you run a brick of Stormshield Thunderhammer Terminators, then you definitely want to have a character with Tannhauser's Bones enhancement with them to access the 5-up Feel No Pain if you plan on selecting the Uphold of the Honor of the Emperor vow. If you don't plan to do that, then you probably don't need the Tannhauser's Bones, because there's no way for you to activate that 5-up shrug without that vow. Unfortunately, the 1 CP Fervent Acclamation, which allows you to get the benefits from the vow in addition to the one that is active for your army, the wording does not give you the vow as if the vow was active for your entire army, so the Tannhauser's Bones extra buff will not activate in addition. Actually needs to have the Uphold the Honor of the Emperor vow active for your army to get that Tannhauser's Bones buff on your whatever Terminators. But still quite a good relic, which allows you to half damage down to the bearer if you have the 35 points spare. If you didn't select the Uphold the Honor of the Emperor vow, you can still get the 6-up Feel No Pain using that stratagem. You just selected in addition to the one, probably fighty one that you've already selected for your army. So Fervent Acclamation is a great stratagem. Chaplain Grimaldus and 20 Crusaders is a match made in heaven, because obviously, as we discussed before, you get the 5-up Feel No Pain for them. Yes, you will have to hide them in the first turn, because unfortunately the 5-up Shrug will not be activated until your turn comes, but then you can cross the territory, the dangerous territory, quite fast, because the Crusaders get the full reroll to advance and charge. So you move them 6, then you advance, roll 3.5, then reroll again to potentially get even more than that. And in the next turn, you're probably in the close enough to actually charge something, and then you can activate the advance and charge and reroll that advance and reroll that charge thanks to their ability and to Grimaldus. We also have access to the Inquisition approved version of World Leader's Blood Surge ability, the 1 CP Devout Push. Essentially, when you are shot at by your opponents, you can make a normal move of up to d6 inches closer to the enemy unit that just shot you. If you are playing against Grey Knights of Thousand Suns, you will be able to move up to 6 inches instead, and also get to move to closer to the nearest Psyker unit instead of just the nearest unit. When your units hit the line of your opponent, remember 1 CP No Escape, preventing it falling back on the 4+, or forcing the Desperate Escape test if the fallback is actually allowed. If you selected the Sustain Hits 1 val, then you will prevent the fallback on a 3+ instead. 1 CP Vicious Riposte is a fight on death on a 4+ stratagem, a very good one, and on a 3+ if you chose Uphold the Honor of the Emperor val. 1 CP Crusader's Wrath is great to give you an extra AP, and if you selected the Lethal Hits val, it also gives you +1 strength. This one is probably the best out of the bunch, just because it allows you to get extra AP on those many numerous attacks that you're gonna get from your Crusader squads or your Sword Brethren. And as we have full rerolls to hit and wound from oaths, sometimes, and we get the lethal hits ability as well if you want to. The AP is one of the limiting factors, and having something that increases the AP is important. The enhancements are nice, but no mandatory ones, so you can pretty much have a very competitive, good list without any enhancements, in my humble opinion. Each gives a buff to the bearer and another buff if you select the correct val. For 2 of them, that extra buff helps the bearer's squad, which is nice. The first one we already discussed, Tannhauser's Bones, and it costs 35 points. The best one is probably Sigismund's Seal, which allows you to have +1 attack on the bearer and also critical hits on 5s. So this is essentially the same ability that the Helbrecht gives if you selected the Sustain Hits val. The 15 points Perdition's Edge is +1 strength and AP for the bearer, and +1 attack if you are in Lethal Hits val. And the last one is the Witch Seeker Bolts one, which allows the bearer's range weapons to have the Precision, Anti-Psyker, and Devastating Wounds abilities, and if the Abhor the Witch is active, then you get full rerolls to hit and wound against Psyker units. This one is probably the least attractive one of 4, because we don't know if we're playing against Psykers or not, but you still have to pay those points, so probably those points are better off spent elsewhere. Now, as tradition dictates, the roster example. So as you can see, we have 2 characters here, Chaplain Grimaldus and Primaris Chaplain. The Chaplain Grimaldus is going to be attached to the 20-man Primaris Crusader squad, and Primaris Chaplain is going to be helping the 10-man Primaris Sword Brethren squad. He has the enhancement Tannhauser's Bones, as we discussed. This one is probably most attractive if you're going to play Uphold the Honor of the Emperor val, and that's sometimes going to happen, but mostly I took it just because I had 35 points spare, and I really like when I have 2,000 points on the nose in my roster. Sigismund Seal is probably going to be a better choice here. Also, we have a 20-man Primaris Crusader squad, obviously. For the Grimaldus, we have a 6-man Eradicator squad with 2 Multi-Melters, a 3-man Inceptor squad. You can take them with the Heavy Bolters or the Plasmas, whatever you like. Both are very good if you're planning to use them more aggressively against elite units, then plasmas are better. If you want to get rid of smaller squads that your opponent has in the back somewhere, then the bolters would be a better choice. 10 primary sword brethren squad, as we said, and 3 redemptor dreadnoughts with plasmas, the regular loadout, and the whirlwind to finish off the 2000 points list. And I hope this video was useful for you. If you have any suggestions to the list, leave them in the comment section below, and I'll see you next time.